Now, back with Jon Stephenson to talk about things to expect from Afghanistan in 2012. And John, you're going back there very shortly to carry on your reporting. But in the last segment, we were saying, there's a whole lot of stuff going wrong. Is anything actually going right?
Well, I think the one thing that's going right, in a way, is that Afghans are starting to realise that there's a finite length to the US and foreign troop presence, and there's a lot of thinking going on about what will we do once they leave, because they will leave. All occupying armies end up leaving. So I think in some ways, that's concentrating their minds wonderfully, but the fact is that they will not be ready by the time that the US and foreign forces leave. There's just no way. For example, you've got to have a state that can protect itself, that has sufficient military and security forces to be able to stand up against, in this case, the Taliban. And there's really, in my mind, just no realistic prospect that they'll be able to do that.
So have there been a lot of failures for the people of Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think that the history of the US-led occupation of Afghanistan has been, a history of failure in many ways. I mean, we could be here all day talking about them, but I think one of the key things, something that New Zealanders do quite well, and the New Zealand troops do quite well, is in the way they treat people from a very different cultural milieu. We're very sensitive in the way we treat people. We've won a lot of friends there, particularly in Bamiyan, where the provincial reconstruction team is based.
Yeah.
But the Americans, I'm sad to say, they could have taken a leaf out of the New Zealand military playbook, but they haven't. They've been, in many cases insensitive, in some cases stupidly so. They've had bad intelligence for raids. They have picked up the wrong people. They've treated people with near contempt, in some cases with great brutality, and that hasn't gone down well in a country with a long history of resisting foreign invaders. There was a gap there after the 2001, after the collapse of the Taliban. People wanted something different. They'd had 3 decades of war. They were desperate.
So there was a sense of hope at some
point.
There
was a sense of hope and optimism. I mean, I remember, as I was going to say, we're now into 3 decades of war, so more than 3 decades of war. But there was, in 2001, there was that real wish that something better could emerge, that we were sick of fighting, we were sick of killing, we were sick of death. And I remember one guy at Tora Bora, where I was covering the battle there, said to me at the end of the battle, he said, well, now that you are the masters of this land, can you please rebuild this road? There was a sense of great expectation, and sadly we've failed to deliver to those people, partly because we haven't won their trust.
So looking ahead to next year, I mean, our SAS are due to be pulled out in March. I guess our reconstruction team will still be there. What is going to happen for Afghanistan in 2012?
Well, I'm not so sure that the SAS will be withdrawn. It's likely, but not certain. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Prime Minister changes his mind on that, or whether he had no intention of ever pulling them out, but that they get extended again, as they already have been. I mean, you remember they have already been extended once, but whether or not they come out, we'll still have the Bamiyan PRT there for some time. That's being drawn down, and the people are increasingly focused on things like agriculture and forms of aid, and passing the security aspects more and more to the Afghans in Bamiyan. But overall, I think the country's in a real mess. This is going to be a critical year. We're in a quiet season in a way right now because the snows are coming, the winter's coming, and then we return early in the year to what's called the fighting season.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a particularly vicious and brutal season. I think you'll see a lot more Taliban attacks in Kabul, the capital, which is a way of reminding people that, hey, we're not just in the countryside, we're not just in the mountains, we can come down and strike you in the safest place in the country. So I think there's going to be a lot more violence, a lot more bloodshed, a lot more instability.
What about in Bamiyan in the north?
Well, I don't think the indicators anywhere in Afghanistan are positive. I think, if anything, there'll be more attacks in Bamiyan. Certainly won't be fewer, but it's hard to predict these things. It depends on all sorts of variations. I mean, Bamiyan is predominantly Hazara. They were people who were persecuted by the Taliban. They hate the Taliban, and they're basically on our side. They don't want us to. They haven't caused any problems for us. The Hazara people, the people who have killed New Zealanders in Bamiyan, have been people crossing over from neighbouring provinces. So it's hard to know. I think it's quite likely there could be an attack or more attacks, but hopefully we won't see any more New Zealanders coming home in body bags.
We're talking to freelance journalist Jon Stephenson, who is heading back off to Afghanistan shortly. And what will you be focusing on? Are you looking for more proof of torture, or are you looking for something more conclusive?
Well, what I'm looking for really, I'm looking at a range of stories. I mean, I'm very interested in the situation, how it's, where it's at exactly compared to when I was there last year. What have been the changes, what's likely to happen, what are the Americans likely to do. But I'm also interested, of course, in seeing, whether some of the statements that have been made by the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister, who's recently left Parliament, Wammo, but also the former Chief of Defence Force, Jerry Mataparai, now the current Governor-General, and the military themselves, whether those statements are accord with the reality on the ground. And, I mean, there have been a whole litany of statements that just do not stack up. For example, Wammo told a Parliamentary Select Committee some time ago that by the end of 2011 the government of Afghanistan would be largely able to stand on its own. I mean, that's just one of many statements over the years that are just laughable.
Yeah, because it's plainly not true, right?
Well, he's welcome to go there and try and walk around Kabul on his own. I don't think he'd last very long.
Yeah.
But, it's an awful mess, and I think that's been one of the problems is the media, as I said before, hasn't really conveyed to New Zealanders. And New Zealanders, I guess, many of them busy. It's a long way away. Unless you've got a kid there in the military, there's no real connection or no real interest. It's just another war.
Well, and the main stuff that does get reported is a bomb goes off somewhere and some people were killed, and that's all we get to hear, and it doesn't seem to all match up or glue together.
Well, actually, I should say that the large amount of stuff that we see is Defence Force spin that gets put out, gets churned out, with astonishing regularity. And once again, they're entitled to put their case. I mean, every organisation's allowed to say that we're doing this good stuff, and it's for the journalists to go away and measure it. But it's very hard to measure it when you're sitting in Wellington. You've got to write 5 stories a day, and you get a press release, and it's very tempting just to rewrite it and put in the photo that Defence Force has supplied, and not take the time to actually dig around and ask the right questions and make calls. So they've had a bit of a one-way street when it comes to the coverage of Afghanistan as far as they're concerned, and perhaps my work is an attempt to sort of redress the imbalance.
Yeah, and actually you've brought in some astounding stats as well about some of the humanitarian aspects. Yeah,
well, I was just. I mean, as you can imagine, every day, we get different figures about deaths, injuries, the insurgency changes from time to time. But I was just looking at some of the more sort of slower moving statistics, if you like, and things like life expectancy, which hovers around 44 years for the average Afghan. I mean, that's astounding. It's almost. It's almost ours is almost twice as high in New Zealand. 44 years. Isn't it astonishing that someone can be born in Afghanistan and have half as much life expectancy as you do in New Zealand?
And it obviously relates to a health system and diet as opposed to war.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very hard country with strong problems, challenges in infrastructure. Roads, hospitals, drinking water, electricity, all those sort of things that make life a little more bearable. Infant mortality, I mean, that will have changed since these statistics came out, but 152 deaths per 1,000 live births. 152 kids die for every 1,000. I mean, can you imagine what would happen if that was New Zealand? I mean, it'd be a national outcry. Afghans with sustainable access to clean drinking water. This particular statistic came out 2 years ago. It was about 22%. So only 1 in 5 people approximately has access to clean drinking water, and it goes on and on. Unemployment, 40%. People affected by the conflict, 96%, and that's obviously not just in the case of people who are experiencing fighting today, but who've grown up in a broken country with wars over the years, and you're dealing with people that are they're profoundly traumatised. All these people, they don't know what it is to have a normal life.
But because that government is corrupt, it's not a matter of, say, the American military machine funneling money away from themselves and into these humanitarian efforts, is it? Because that's just going to end up lining the pockets of the people in power.
Well, it's a very good question and a very hard question to answer quickly, but let me say that it costs, from memory, something like $1 million a year, $1 million US, just to have a single US soldier on the ground in terms of what it takes to supply them and so on. That money possibly could be very well spent if you had less troops there, but a better relationship with Afghans, and if you also let Afghans get the experience of dispersing the aid themselves. Now, there would be a lot of corruption, but frankly, the Western community has not done a great deal better. I mean, they've still got to deal with corrupt Afghans themselves. They can't just go out and disperse all the aid. So I think there's a feeling amongst a lot of the Afghans that if you give us the chance to do it right, there will still be some corruption, but at least we'll learn, at least we'll be involved directly, we'll have a stake in us.
If America hadn't gone into Iraq, would Afghanistan be in a better or worse state right now, or just the same?
Well, that would have depended on what policy in America. I mean, if America hadn't gone to Iraq and had pursued disastrous policies in Afghanistan, well, Afghanistan would still be in a pretty woeful state. But if instead of going into Iraq, America had used its resources, many of the resources which it shifted out, to achieve stability, to deliver to the Afghan people in terms of infrastructure, jobs and so on, then I have no question in my mind whatsoever that it would have been a much safer, better functioning place. It wouldn't have been a Jeffersonian democracy, but it would have been in a relatively functioning state that would have lifted the expectations of the people and won the people over.
We've been thinking about what to expect from Afghanistan in 2012 with freelance journalist Jon Stephenson, who's about to head back. Stay safe over there, John.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing and reading your reports next year.